It's my nerd world, and welcome to it. This one goes out to all the Star Wars fans out there. No, look, here's the deal. This is a bonus podcast, and the reason I'm doing this bonus show is because a couple of big things have dropped. One of them dropped like right after I finished up the show from the weekend, and I was intending on hanging on to this particular leaked item as it relates to Reylo until this weekend's batch of shows around Celebration in Chicago. But then this article got released, a lengthy piece about J.J. Abrams' Bad Robot, from Fast Company, and it includes a really good Q&A with J.J. Abrams. So I decided, since I had the time, I was going to sit down and put out a bonus podcast. This is a fantastic opportunity if you're heading to Celebration and looking for some Star Wars content to listen to on your travels that's not directly related to the events at Celebration, which is a really good idea that the majority of other podcasts have done. But since I'm not going to Celebration, a lot of people aren't. This will be good for you. But for those that are traveling to Celebration and want to hear less about what they're about to experience and more just commentary about Star Wars, then this is the bonus show for you. So sit back, hang tight as we dive into the bonus episode of a Star Wars podcast with myself, John Justice, and my nerd world.
Nothing will stand in our way.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
I will finish what you started.
Who are you?
I'm no one. There are stories about what happened.
It's true. All of it.
The Force. It's calling to you.
My nerd world.
Just let it in.
And again, welcome to this bonus episode of a Star Wars podcast. And there was this particular item that dropped, and I'm going to save that item, and I know a lot of you are going to be listening to hear my thoughts on this particular leak that came out in regards to Reylo and what Kylo was dealing with allegedly at the start of the film. I'm going to hold off on that until I give my thoughts and share this interview and this article by Fast Company that was done with J.J. Abrams, because there's some context in what JJ said in this interview that, to me, relates to this leak and where we're going in episode 9. So if this is your first time checking out the show, I hope you go back and check out past episodes. I do this out of my love of Star Wars, and I can't thank you enough for downloading the show and helping to grow it over the course of the past couple years. The show really, as I mentioned last week, has really gained a lot of new followers, and it's an absolute joy to do and so fulfilling that there's so many people that have been gravitating towards the show as of late, and I really can't be thankful enough. And thank you to those who have purchased my sci-fi book. I'll talk a little bit about that throughout the show today, simply because it relates to the creative process, and especially the way that episode 8, The Last Jedi, and 9 was crafted in terms of storytelling. So I'll just provide some details in regards to the sci-fi book as we work through the show today. No listener feedback. We'll be saving that for the weekend, especially with all of the shows that I'll be doing this weekend in regards to everything that's coming out for Celebration. And it's kind of already started. EA put out just a real quick sort of moving poster for Jedi Fallen Order. And it sounds like we're into Tuesday, we're heading into Wednesday, ramping up for the start of Celebration, all leading towards what everybody is waiting for, and that is that Episode 9 panel that'll happen on Friday. As soon as that panel is over and we've all had a chance to digest the trailer and the title, I will be getting behind this microphone as soon as possible to put out my reaction podcast. And like I mentioned on last week's show, I'll be doing multiple podcasts throughout the weekend based off of all the announcements and trailers and everything that's going to be released in Chicago. So before we get to that Reylo leak, which is pretty significant, and I think there's a lot of legitimacy to it. The person that leaked it out's got some credibility. I want to spend some time going through this Fast Company article. Real fantastic piece talking about J.J. Abrams, Bad Robot, the creative process, everything that he's involved in. What I've done is there's two different articles. There was one that's basically an expose about J.J. and Bad Robot and where he sees Bad Robot going in the future. There's also this Q&A that was done, and that article came out afterward. Thing came out like yesterday. I basically pulled everything in regards to Episode 9 and put it all together to share with you. And what I'm going to do is I'm basically just going to read to you the highlights from the article that relates to Star Wars Episode 9, J.J. Abrams, and the creative process. Bad Robot's Santa Monica, California headquarters intentionally mislabeled the National Typewriter Company in raised Futura lettering, features a small gold placard above the buzzer asking the question that unsuspecting visitors will soon find relevant. Are you ready? In the reception area, 2 shelves are packed with toys and curios, old-school board games, a plastic skull and a bell jar, retired typewriters, and, of course, robots. A sign encourages guests to please create, and rows of colored pencils and giant sheets of newsprint are provided. Dozens of Bad Robot employees, armed with bagels and coffee procured from the kitchen, begin heading into one of the building's theaters, an expansive dark gray room that doubles as a post-production soundstage. It's 9:30 a.m. on a Monday, time for an all-hands gathering. Today, the energy is heightened. The proceedings kick off with a Star Wars-themed game of charades in honor of the man casually slouched in one of the perimeter seats. His gravity-defying hair forming a tousled mop, J.J. Abrams is back. Typically, Abrams' homecoming from a set means organized chaos at Bad Robot. His directing work on a project is far from over after filming wraps, and the company's cushy facilities become a convenient base of operations for further work. Over the past few years, additional scenes for The Force Awakens have been shot on Bad Robot's roof, and a bar scene from Star Trek Into Darkness was filmed in one of the company's screening rooms. But this time, his return has been particularly dramatic. He's brought 23 post-production technicians with him to help finish Trixie, Episode 9's codename, in time for the film's December release. Time's Up, which works out of Bad Robot's offices, stemming from co-CEO Katie McGrath's role in organizing the group, moved in across the street into another Bad Robot building in order to make room. All right, so that gives you the gist of what the expose of J.J. Abrams, the initial article, has to say. There's a lot of just really interesting insight into the creative process, where J.J. Abrams feels Hollywood is going, how he goes about picking and choosing projects. If you get the opportunity, track the article down and give it a good read, especially if you are heading towards, again, Celebration. This is a good opportunity to sort of immerse yourself in this world behind the world that we all enjoy. Look, I'm fascinated by the creative process. I really am. I love watching documentaries. I love listening to the commentaries on all the Star Wars films, as most films that I love. I love listening to the commentaries and seeing the behind the scenes and how they're made. And especially when it comes to Star Wars. I am infinitely fascinated with the way that Kathleen Kennedy and Lucasfilm have handled the creation of these new stories. And even beyond the fan in me that wants to see how the story wraps up, right, which is the most important thing. Right below that, though, is the creative process and how they worked this out and how they crafted and created this story. Now, of course, this Q&A and what I'm about to share with you is already causing quite a bit of controversy, because J.J. Abrams is very, very good at giving details without giving details, and he leaves things a bit ambiguous in regards to Episode 8, The Last Jedi, what he had to do to craft the story based off of what Rian Johnson did. if you take previous comments and you believe what J.J. Abrams said prior, that he read the script for The Last Jedi, loved it, was jealous he wasn't the one filming it, and you couple that with what he has to say now about The Last Jedi and what he has to do with 9, there are different avenues of speculation and assumptions that you could make, and we probably won't ever know which one is true until we're so far down the line that it doesn't matter if J.J. Abrams is concealing anything or his true feelings, right? With that, I will give my own take on what I feel like J.J. Abrams is saying, and specifically some of the potential story beat ideas that had to change because of what Rian Johnson did. So once we get through this and I add my commentary again, we'll dive into that Ben Solo and where his head is at rumor and who he may or may not visit in 9 to seek guidance in this most recent Episode 9 leak. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get to the interview portion of this Fast Company interview that was done in this magazine. So they ask this: how does it feel to be back after being away so many months filming Star Wars Episode 9? JJ said this: it's great for me, especially, and I said this at the all-hands meeting, just to see all these faces. Some people at the company were here just when I was leaving. They just got here, and then a ton of people have shown up since I've been away. So to come back to this home, business home, professional home, and have a fairly high percentage of people be brand new faces, it's a surreal thing. Of course, I've known about it technically. I was prepared for it, but you show up and all of a sudden there are like these flesh and blood people with life experiences and points of view and alike. I'll hear things before, so I'll kind of know a little bit about everyone, and then there are all the interns too. And then to get to see them in person and feel like, wow, this is really Katie and all the department heads, Brian, they've done such a good job bolstering the team. It's great to come back. I mean, obviously, the simple answer is, I'm just happy to see my family again. It's been so long. So Fast Company then asks, how did it feel when you were suddenly brought on to direct Episode 9 after Colin Trevorrow departed while the film was still in development? Abrams said, I wasn't supposed to be here. I wasn't the guy, you know. I was working on some other things, and I had something else that I was assuming would be the next project, if we'd be so lucky. And then Kathleen Kennedy called and said, would you really seriously consider coming on board? And once that started, it all happened pretty quickly. The whole thing was a crazy leap of faith. And there was an actual moment when I nearly said, no, I'm not going to do this. I was trepidatious to begin with getting involved because I love Star Wars so much, and I felt like it was almost on a personal level a dangerous thing to get too close to something that you care so much about. And yet, with Force Awakens, I feel like we managed to introduce these new characters, for some people new actors, and continue a story in a way I thought had heart and humanity and humor and surprise. Though, of course, I'm aware that there are critics of that movie. It felt like we dodged a bullet, like we got it there. We got to do something. I left loving Star Wars as much as I did when I got there. Like somehow it was on a personal, selfish level, something I was really happy to have done. Not just excited about doing, but happy to have done. And to ask to have that happen again, I felt a little bit like I was playing with fire. Like, why go back? You managed to make it work. What the hell am I thinking? And then there was a moment when I literally said, no. And Katie said, you should do this. And my first thought was, has she met someone? And then I thought, she's usually right about stuff. And when she said it, I think that she felt like it was an opportunity to bring to a close this story that we had begun and had continued, of course. And I could see that even though the last thing on my mind was going away and jumping back into that, especially with the time constraints. Constraints that we were all faced with. Okay, so let me stop here real quick. I love this. I honestly, legitimately do. And the reason why I love this is because oftentimes through adversity comes the greatest work. Oftentimes when you're challenged and not necessarily even wanting to do something, sometimes that's when you get like the best product. And look, I could spend a lot of time covering different examples of this. I will speak directly to the things that I love most, entertainment-wise, where I know that this type of scenario played out. One of them, honestly, would be the original Star Wars: A New Hope. If you've gone back and looked at the Empire of Dreams documentary or read any of the making of books, you'll know that film, for all intents and purposes, should not have worked out the way that it did. In my science fiction space opera Embark, there's a central theme throughout the story. I wanted to tap into something that I don't want to say mythological, but I wanted to tap into something on an emotional level, something that could bring everybody together. The Force without being the Force. I'm personally a believer that everything happens for a reason, and I won't waste a lot of time discussing this, but I'm a firm believer that, even good and bad stuff, everything that happens, it does happen for a reason. We still have our own free will, but there is a grand design at play, my own personal belief. So I injected that into my story because I wanted to have something in there that the characters in the book all kind of shared a belief in, right? And again, that book was written because of my love of Star Wars. I wanted to know what it was like to go and create a host of characters and whether or not I could tell stories and be a writer, because I'm a horrible writer, right? Through adversity, oftentimes we produce some of our best work. That original Star Wars movie, should not have turned out that way. And if it wasn't for the cut of it not being good and George Lucas bringing in editors who had to work with limited amounts of film and to put it all together, I mean, again, all of that mixed in made for this movie that changed the world forever. Depeche Mode is one of my... It is my all-time favorite band. Two things. I was a fan of Star Wars before I was a fan of anything else. And I was a fan of Depeche Mode before I was a fan of any other band. My favorite album by them was the 1994 release, Songs of Faith and Devotion. For those that are Depeche Mode fans and have been following the band long enough and are aware of their history, that album was made during the roughest point for the band ever. The lead singer, Dave Gahan, was addicted to heroin at the time. The chief songwriter, Martin Gore, was an alcoholic. One of the other founding members, Andrew Fletcher, ended up going through a nervous breakdown on tour. Alan Wilder, the other fourth member of the band at the time, left during the tour in promotion of that album. And yet that album is top to bottom my favorite album of all time, not just of that band, but of all time. And I'm convinced that it was only through that adversity that the band went through, and they made it through the other side, were they able to create something so unique and special. To hear J.J. Abrams going into this trepidatiously and cautiously gets me so excited for the possibility of Episode 9. And I know that sounds strange, but it doesn't sound like he wanted to do it. No, he was scared to do it. And to me, sometimes that really does force you to bring out some of the best work that you're capable of doing. When I went to go write the follow-up to Embark, which is finished, it's called Treasure in Darkness. It'll be released sometime in June. I'm currently editing it. And I'll get into this a little bit more. I always had a beginning, middle, and end. It was always going to be a trilogy. I knew what happened at the beginning. I knew what was supposed to happen in the middle, and I know how it's going to end. How we get there, I'm still not 100% sure for the third book. And even in writing the second book, which came out shorter, ended up being a good thing. Because I knew what needed to happen in the book. I knew the events that had to take place to get us to the big finale, the epic finale, and that's basically what the story is going to end up being. Sort of your epic start origin of what happened with these characters, how were they thrust into this situation. Then we get the middle version, right, which is when everything goes to hell in a handbasket. Okay, and then we're going to get the epic finale. in the middle of writing that book, there were some moments where I'm not sure where we're going to go. And honestly, I feel like the second book is exponentially better than the first one is, than the first book. So if you've already purchased Embark and you liked it, I'm confident you're really going to enjoy. At least I hope you do. It's going to end up being a Last Jedi situation where I think the people that read the first book are going to there's going to be half of them are going to love it and half of them are going to hate it. All right, so let's get back into what J.J. Abrams had to say. Talking about time constraints. JJ said this. What were the time constraints? And JJ said, because they had announced release dates and everything works backwards. Was the schedule unusually fast? Abrams said, to have no script and to have a release date and have it essentially a 2-year window when you're saying to yourself, you've got 2 years from the decision to do it to release, and you have literally nothing. You don't have a story, you don't have a cast, you don't have designers, you don't have sets. There was a crew and there were things that will be worked on for the version that preceded ours, but this was starting over. And because this was such a mega job, I knew at the very least I needed a co-writer to work on this thing. But I didn't know who that co-writer would be. There was nothing. So the first thing I did was reach out to a writer who I've admired for years, and that's Chris Terrio, who didn't really know to say, listen, would you, who I didn't really know, to say, listen, would you want to write Star Wars with me? And he screamed. Right? Which makes me laugh a little bit. So, Fast Company says, out of terror or excitement? And Abrams says, probably both, a bit of both. But I think that definitely excitement. And what I realized in that moment was I hadn't been aware until then that I needed to work with someone who would scream at the prospect of working on Star Wars. Because I'd been through the process. Right? And I was looking back. I was looking at brass tacks. This is what it's going to take. This is the reality of it. And he was looking at it sort of childlike, saying, oh my gosh, I can't believe we get to play in this world. Which I needed to be reminded of. I needed that point of view because that's not where I was. Of course, I was excited about what we could do. But I was acutely aware of how little time we had to do a fairly enormous job. And look, I can't even imagine. And this is not, and just for the record, I like to draw on, for those that have been listening to the show, I like to draw on personal experiences. That's just my style. It's my style doing my full-time radio show. So this is not a blatant promotion of my novels by any stretch of the imagination. I wish it were that easy to go and sell books because it's not. I just like drawing from my experience of writing these stories because it provides a perspective that I didn't have before I decided to become a writer. And I know just from what I need to do, I have the writing part of it that has to be done, and then I have the editing part of it, which my wife helps me out with, and then I have an individual who can help go and proofread, and then I have a person who does, Tom Edwards, who does amazing cover art for me, and that all takes time, and you have to work on other people's schedule. I can't even fathom how in the world that they could go about producing a Star Wars movie within 2 years. That is just insane, an impossible task to me. All right, so J.J. Abrams goes on to say, so to answer your question, I went into it in an all leap of faith, aware that Katie was very supportive of this thing. I believe that's his wife, right? And felt it was the right thing. And so her divining rod of what's real and what's right was a comfort, despite her not being in London where most of the shooting took place. And it was just an immediate immersion into the what-ifs of it all, which is the fun of it, but also the pressure of it. And I'm not complaining when I say this, but it was having to make decisions based on gut. When Damon Lindelof and I created Lost, we essentially had 12 weeks to write, cast, shoot, cut, and turn in a 2-hour pilot with a big cast. And that was a crazy short amount of time. The benefit was that we didn't have time to overthink. There wasn't time to get studio notes that end up taking you in lateral positions and make you adjust things, death by 1,000 cuts, to a place where something doesn't resemble what it should be and you can't remember how or why you got there. So the good news is that I was jumping in with a writer whom I admired enormously, with Kathy and Colm Green, a producer whom I've never met, Michelle Rewan, who had been my assistant, and whom Kathy had hired to work with her as producer. But it was a completely unknown scenario. I had some gut instincts about where the story would have gone, but without getting into the weeds on episode 8, that was a story that Ryan wrote and was telling based on 7 before we met. So he was taking the thing in another direction. So we had to respond to episode 8. So our movie was not just following what we had started. It was following what we had started and then had been advanced by someone else. So there was that. And finally, it was resolving 9 movies. While there are some threads of larger ideas and big picture things that had been conceived decades ago, and a lot of ideas that Lawrence Kasdan and I had when we were doing episode 7, the lack of absolute inevitability, the lack of a complete structure for this thing, given the way it was being run, was an enormous challenge. Okay, so that's some stuff to chew on. Okay, so let's go back real quick. Let's kind of not rip apart, but let's go sort of sentence by sentence here with what JJ is saying. Not getting into the weeds on 8. That was a story that Ryan wrote and was telling based off of 7 before we met. Okay, we do know that Rian Johnson was writing episode 8, The Last Jedi, while they were shooting The Force Awakens. We know that he was watching dailies, was actually on set, and he was writing this story. So, there's a bit of wordplay here in what J.J. Abrams is actually saying in regards to, how much work Ryan was doing and what story he was telling. I am still very much of the opinion that they had a beginning, a middle, and an end. And as I've mentioned many times on the show, 1, I'm okay with whatever J.J. Abrams and Chris Terrio do with episode 9. That movie, when we have a chance to see it, is what happens in the universe regardless of what I say. And I will like it or love it based off the merits of the movie itself. Honestly, I'll just be upfront. There is very little chance I will not like this movie. I love The Last Jedi, and even if J.J. Abrams decides that he's going to undo a bunch of what I love about The Last Jedi, which I don't think is going to happen, even if he were to do that, I'm fine with that because you know what? I always have The Last Jedi. Okay? So when he says, he was taking this thing in another direction, I think a lot of people are probably going to point to the core element, the core story, the end game, which is the other thing that I've said a lot, that Reylo is the end game. That's dependent on what your version of Reylo is. When I think of Reylo, I'm thinking of the central resolving of this story are those 2 characters and how they work things out. It could be romantic. It could not be romantic. I do not believe that they're related. Okay? But I do believe that all along Reylo is the endgame. And this leak that we got is going to sort of lead into that as well. When he says that he was taking this thing in another direction, I think that a lot of people, because they're already doing, they're interpreting that to talk about, what happens with Rey, her parentage, Kylo, all this kind of stuff. Ryan said that he had open game to do what he wanted to do with Rey's parentage, but I believe that they also said that he agreed with what J.J. Abrams was doing and that Rey was a nobody. I think the other direction stuff doesn't have anything to do with Rey and Kylo Ren. I think the other direction stuff has to do with where the Resistance ended up at the end of the film. I think that the other direction has to do with the fact that Rian Johnson decided to create a very epic but personal story based off of what happens right after Episode 7 as opposed to jumping forward in the timeline. That's where I think the difference is. Now, again, there's no way to know that until we actually go and see the movie to find out, but I still firmly believe that they had the story beats of 1, 2, and 3 and knew where the arc was going to go with these 2 characters and what was going to happen at the end. And we've heard that from the actors themselves. So when we hear new directions, I think it's ancillary stuff that doesn't change the core of the story, which is Reylo. All right, let's get back into more of what he said. It was following what we had started and then had been advanced by someone else. And finally, it was resolving 9 movies. Okay, so what I'm gathering here is that J.J. Abrams, because he's his own person, may have taken the story in Episode 8 in a different direction, but he didn't do that. So he's saying, look, we have what we started in 7. I have to work off of what Rian Johnson did in 8, and then I have to go and carry that story forward along with what we started before, and then also tie all the movies together. Now, this is where I think we can start to begin to pull on the threads of what we've known already. I think a lot of these prequel ideas may actually end up coming true. Those red troopers on the poster that got leaked, I'm leaning more towards those are clones now. The fact that they're going to allegedly go to this snow planet and there's a droid factory there and battle droids involved, I think there is going to be a definitive tie-in of all 9 movies, and I think that J.J. Abrams is going to be pulling in sort of these visual clues rather than large story beats. I do think that we are going to get some big major thing, and this kind of gets revealed a bit. Not revealed, but it gets alluded to within the article. But I think that for those of us that have been looking at the teaser poster, the leaks that we've known, and comments, and then this reaffirming of tying all 9 of these movies together, I think a lot of these threads that we've been pulling on actually turn out to be attached to something. While there are some threads of larger ideas and some big picture things that had been conceived decades ago, and a lot of ideas that Lawrence Kasdan and I had when we were doing 7, the lack of absolute inevitability, the lack of a complete structure for this thing, given the way it was being run, was an enormous challenge. Okay, so there's a little bit of a hint that for those that have more time than I am, you might be able to go back and sort of look at some other ideas and some things that were suggested before. And this might actually play into, and I haven't seen the correlation yet, but there's sort of 2 parts to this leak that I'm going to talk about here in a moment. And the second part involves Kylo Ren apparently going to some oracle to seek advice. And I'm wondering if that's not an idea that might have been in previous drafts or versions of the original trilogy but never explored. Okay, so back to what JJ was saying. However, to answer your question, truly, finally, now that I'm back, the difference is I feel like we might have done it. Like, I actually feel like this crazy challenge that could have been wildly uncomfortable, a contortion of ideas, and a kind of shoving in of answers and band-aids and bridges and things that would have felt messy. Strangely, we were sort of relentless and almost unbearably disciplined about the story and forcing ourselves to question and answer some fundamental things that at the beginning I absolutely had no clue how we would begin to address. I feel like we've gotten to a place, without jinxing anything or sounding more confident than I deserve to be, I feel like we're in a place where we might have something incredibly special. So I feel relief being home, and I feel gratitude that I got to do it. And more than anything, I'm excited about what I think we might have. Look, I don't know about you, that gives me chills. It really, really does. I have an enormous amount of respect for Rian Johnson. I think the man is incredibly wicked smart. I think he is a master storyteller already. I think he's a brave soul for continuing to endure the nonsense from those that don't like The Last Jedi, and for being brave enough to sort of step out into the wilderness and say, you know what, I'm going to start Episode 8 right after Episode 7 stopped. I'm going to have Luke Skywalker throw his lightsaber away. I'm going to have this be a broken down man, a flawed individual. I'm going to take all these risks. I'm also a massive fan of J.J. Abrams. I really am. And I don't think that he gets enough credit yet among some of the great filmmakers for not just his own work, but the work that he produces. I love Super 8. Mission Impossible 3 is my favorite Mission Impossible movie. I'm a fan of both the reboot of Star Trek, and I love Into Darkness. The guy just has a way of being able to tell stories. And if he thinks that he has something special and that they may have actually pulled it off, that is absolutely enough for me. I am so excited. And I actually think now, I'm changing my tune a little bit on this, but I'm actually starting to think that one of the big reasons why we haven't had anything yet, we're a couple days out. We don't have to wait too much longer before we have our episode 9 panel, our title, and our teaser, and hopefully longer trailer type version. But I think that JJ, I think Kathleen Kennedy, I think Bob Iger, I think they all know that they've got something real special on their hands. And once they begin to toss at us little teeny tiny bits and bytes, we're all going to be able to see it firsthand. I really do honestly believe that. I am super excited for this movie, and even if it was possible, even more so than I was when before I read this article, now that I've read what J.J. Abrams had to say. Look, the guy, I've never seen him in all the interviews, right? He's always been sort of, hey, we have to go and we're going to go and do this, and it's going to be a daunting task. And I've watched the documentary for The Force Awakens who knows how many times. And the fact that he's sitting back going, I think we actually pulled it off, and I think we've actually got something special. Dude, I absolutely cannot wait. All right, let's go ahead and switch gears, and let's get into this leak.
The hyperdrive is leaking.
Again, I really need a better one. I really do. I need a little Rey, actually. It's what I really need.
I need someone to show me my place in all this.
And his name is Ben Solo. All right, so here's the deal. So this leak came from Jedi Paxis. He's put out some good information already. Seems to be a credible source. Says this. A trusted source has come through once again with some new details on what we may be seeing in Episode 9. Some of what you're about to read and see may or may not be a bit controversial with some groups of fans, so I highly encourage you to interact civilly. Keep an open mind and withhold any judgment until after you've seen the movie this December. With that disclaimer, let's get to the meat of it. All right, one more quick note. I know I've been holding off, and I know a lot of you are listening just to hear this, but I hope you enjoyed my JJ conversation. I saw somebody post somebody posted basically saying with all of the secrecy surrounding the script and everything that the cast has to go through to make sure nothing leaks out, how in the world can anybody go and find out story beats about the movie and blah, 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 blah. There's a really simple explanation as to why. The person that Jedi Paxis has a contact with has probably seen a trailer. That's my guess. My guess is what I'm about to share with you from this leak is actually something that is going to be, maybe not so plainly, but is going to be alluded to in the trailer. That's where I think they ended. That's how this type of stuff gets out. Same thing with the marketing stuff. We had people that were talking about, MakingStarWars.net and other places have been talking about, Red First Order Troopers and all this stuff. And it turned out that, they probably saw the marketing poster that we all saw. Okay. So it goes like this. When we pick up Kylo's story in 9, he's still struggling between the light side and the dark side. In addition to this, he's also dealing with how to reconcile his feelings toward Rey. My source specifically referred to these feelings as love for Rey. I'm going to get back to that. Kylo either seeks out or is summoned by a new character that is being referred to by my source as the Oracle. Whether this is a code name used during production or the real name of a character is unclear. In addition to the concept art that my source had access to, and they put a recreation of this on the website, a drawing. She also saw the sculpt of the giant baby, doing that thing with my fingers, head that the Oracle sits on top of, and described it as essentially identical to the art, just unpainted, with the size appearing to be 10 feet wide. My source could not confirm this for sure, but is under the assumption that the swamp environment that the Oracle is found in is on the forested planet seen in previously leaked set photos. She is also under the impression that the spider-like creature is somehow a parasite leeching off of the unconscious, slumbering baby elf-looking thing below. At first glance, it's easy to look at the image. You can go to reddit.com, go to Reddit, Star Wars Leaks, you can find it there. And question whether or not it feels like it fits in Star Wars, but after having sat on it for a while, I'm personally kind of into it. It feels a bit inspired like Ralph McQuarrie, a bit like a mix between the Dagobah spiders, the Dagobah swamp creature, and the Gorax concept from Return of the Jedi. Most of those things, among other McQuarrie works, have found new life in recent Star Wars projects, so an amalgam of elements seems reasonable to me. Only time will tell how this looks on screen or if it'll even make it into a final cut. Okay. So let's get back to the good stuff, and that is feelings of love for Rey. Look, that's obviously good news for those of us that are fans of the idea of Reylo. I love this idea. What I hope to see, and again, I'm going to keep prefacing this by saying whatever they do, they do. But if this were me writing the story, right? And again, I'm going to say that from the standpoint of what I would like to see, what I would write based off my own experiences. I love this idea of Ben Solo being conflicted with the light and the dark, and that conflict with the light is now magnified because of his feelings towards Rey. And also the fact that she essentially rejected him on his first proposal, right? And please, ladies and gentlemen, feel free to bring in your Pride and Prejudice examples. I'm all for it, okay? But again, and I know and there's a lot of validity to it. I get it, and that's kind of what kind of what this is feeling like. But I love this idea that, Kylo Ren thought he had the girl and thought he was gonna go and have it all in The Last Jedi, and the dumb idiot blew it. Because he didn't realize that the person that was in front of him, the girl standing in front of him, was a hell of a lot more important than ruling of the galaxy and pushing everything aside and letting old things die. What I would love to see is this nod to having just watched Return of the Jedi. I'd love to see this nod to Return of the Jedi, where when I was a kid watching the original trilogy, this idea that Obi-Wan tells Luke Skywalker that, well, Luke Skywalker first talks to Yoda before he passes away. Twilight is upon me, and soon night must fall. Twilight is upon me, and soon night must fall. Okay, anyway. This idea where he says, I am a Jedi. Oh, right? No, you have to face Vader again. I remember as a kid going, oh my gosh, what a horrible choice. Luke wants to become this Jedi, right? Now he's accepted this hero's journey, but in order to do so, he has to face his father again. And then Obi-Wan Kenobi, Force Ghost in it, shows up. Oh, wow, how bad would that suck to be Force Ghosted? Like, if you had, like Force Ghosts that dated people in the real Star Wars world, and then you had the Force Ghost ghost you? You were Force Ghost? I apologize. Okay, so, and then you have Obi-Wan Kenobi tell him the same thing. You got to go face Vader again. Now, whether or not that was Kenobi going, you got to take Vader down, dude, and this is how I'm going to get you to do it. You can't become a Jedi until you do. It doesn't matter. As a kid, I remember that having so much significance. I didn't care what the motivation was. I didn't care if there was rationale. All that I cared about was, oh my gosh, Luke cannot fulfill his destiny without facing his father again. What I'm hoping plays out here, and again, this is pure speculation, but what I'm hoping is that this oracle that Kylo has to go and seek, right? He's obviously going on some journey in this film. That this oracle is going to explain to him, yo, dude, if you want to rectify this situation, you got to make a choice, right? You got to square off with that girl again, and you got to make amends. I'm hoping that it's something like that. Like the oracle is in a nod to Return of the Jedi, is going to Kylo and says, you got to go and face Rey again. And Rey's not going to have anything to do with it, leading to this final conflict where they're both going to realize that they are the only ones that can balance out this whole equation. Don't forget, this movie's going to end on a massive high note. It has to. And if it's the end of the Skywalker saga, okay, then you've got to have Ben-demption, in my opinion. It's got to happen. And you've got to leave the movie feeling good. So even if for some reason Ben-demption doesn't involve a living Ben Solo at the end of it, I'm convinced that they've come up with some type of solution. I'm of the opinion that Ben's going to make it, but be that as it may, I am confident that they will come up with a solution that justifies Ben sacrificing himself in a way that Rey can still go and lead a happy existence, and everybody will be happy in the end. I don't know how you get there. I still am of the opinion you get a Ben-demption, and then you get these two powerful individuals, the darkness and the light to meet it, and they're the only ones that end up bringing balance and closure to this whole situation. That's how I see this whole thing wrapping up. But I love this idea that he's struggling between the light and the dark side, and how to reconcile his feelings towards Rey. And then maybe at the end of this thing, love ends up being the answer. That ends up bringing balance. And then he has to go and confront Rey to convince her as such. And again, I'm just excited to get there. I'm just excited to see how the whole thing plays out. And that leak alone, and I'm gonna guess that come Friday, the next time you probably hear my voice, unless you listen to one of the older podcasts, but the next time you hear my voice fresh, after we've gotten the panel, the trailer, and the title, that in that trailer we're gonna have some sort of, we're gonna know whether or not we're pulling at the right threads. I firmly believe that. I think that trailer is gonna pack a punch. It's gonna lead to a lot of questions. I don't think they're going to go the Infinity War route. We need to know where this thing is going to amp up our excitement, and just showing a bunch of random shots with a complete lack of context is not going to do it. They're going to need to come for the jugular on this trailer and let us know, hey man, this is where we're heading. Because again, go back and look at that Last Jedi trailer. You go back and watch it now, it is incredible how much they ended up letting on early on. How much they let on in that trailer of where the story was going. All right. Hey, that's it. So, thanks for checking the show out, as always. If you're looking for something to read or an audiobook, it's almost 12 hours. If you're driving, you're flying, you want an ebook to read, you want something, I'm sure you probably want to consume as much Star Wars as possible, which is why I did this bonus content. However, if you're looking for a fun science fiction space opera adventure written by a guy who's a massive Star Wars fan, then go to Amazon.com and pick up my book, Embark. It is available right now on Amazon on ebook, paperback, and audiobook, narrated by me. And go purchase it right now on Amazon.com. And then email me, talkshownerd@gmail.com, and I'll add you to the mailing list as well for the book. Also want to remember, I am still giving away an autographed copy of Embark with Friday's show. So I will announce the winner with Friday's show, but if you email me with a comment or on YouTube, you can just say, hey, add me to the list to be in the running for the free book. I will send it to you free of charge, and I will autograph it any way you like. You want me to sign it Kylo Ren? I'll sign it Ben Solo. I'll do both. No, so you can still have time to get in on that. Just email me and say, hey, I'd like to be in the drawing for the book, and I'll announce the winner on Friday's show. If not, go buy it, go read it, and the next book will be out here in the next few months. And again, get added to the mailing list, talkshownerd@gmail.com. All right, I've rambled enough, and I've promoted my book enough, and I appreciate all those who have purchased it, as always, and I appreciate you checking the show out. I hope you enjoyed it. Back on Friday with another official sort of My Nerd World podcast. Until then, here's Obi-Wan Kenobi to wish you and your loved ones and everybody going to Celebration. I hope you guys all have a fantastic time, and I'll talk to you on Friday. Bye!
The Force will be with you. Always.
My Nerd World.